All right, welcome back to the Austin Film Festival. Thank you guys for coming in. We are talking to the crew and subjects of F11 and Be There, one of the feature documentaries that is screening this week. World premiere, yeah?
Correct.
How did that first screening go? Yeah, go for it.
The premiere? Mm-hmm. It went great. We had a wonderful round of applause at the end, which is always welcome, rather than just dead silence. People asked great questions, but it felt really good to finally get it out into the world, for sure. What did you think, Burk?
I love being there. I love seeing the film finally on a big screen and hearing the amazing music and being able to appreciate the eye of Jethro Waters. Always a treat.
For me, it was the first time that I had seen the film on a big screen. So it opened up a whole other world for me. I mean, I obviously loved it already, but after having seen it so many times, I was surprised at the emotion that I still felt, the anxiety that I still felt from when the KKK came in, and also the tears. I was very happy. And the crowd seemed to respond the same way. We got laughs where we hoped we would get them. And people stuck around and were glued to their seats, so can't complain. It's the beginning.
Awesome.
Given that it was a Sunday night and there was a baseball game playing, I think we did all right.
Oh, that World Series.
I know. Can you believe
that
it?
Silliness.
Just call it off for us, okay?
Next time.
Next time.
We'll do that. All right, so whose idea was this initially?
I tend to be crazy and non-linear, and this...
It's really the best way to be, I mean...
I can't help myself. I was born that way. I tickled my mother on the way out.
There you go.
There you go, exactly. That started it all. I happened to have the pleasure of meeting Burk via the internet, and we said, let's meet. He came to Asheville, North Carolina with a significant other. We had a very lovely first engagement. I obviously knew of his work. And then the next week, there was a dinner party at this event that we had initially met at. It was an exhibition of video work that I'd co-curated. And there were 10 of us sitting around a table in this beautiful exhibition space. And the question came up for all of us, can you recall a time when you faced death? And when Burk's turn came, he shared a story of being in Cambodia, in the jungle, and all of a sudden 3 Khmer Rouge came out of nowhere and pointed weapons at his gut and basically prepared to kill him. Without him speaking the language, without them speaking English, he proceeded to convince them in his lovely Burk way to not do it. Once that was out of the way and the weapons were down, he was able to convince them to stand for a portrait. I went, okay, this guy is probably going to be a compelling subject. If no one has made a film about him, it needs to happen. So I told my wife, somebody needs to make a film about him. She said, you need to do that. So I called Janet, Burk's partner, and said, what do you think? She said, I think it would be a good idea. Come and visit us. So we did shortly thereafter, spoke to Burk, and Burk was all in. He said, I will be an open book for you. And we couldn't have picked a better, more colorful, profound subject to tell a story with. And Jethro and I had known each other, and we wanted to work together. I gave him the heads up that this was a possibility and said, would you like to work on this if it comes to fruition? And he said yes. So when Burk had said yes, when we were standing in his studio in Wilson, I immediately called Jethro, who was living in Virginia at the time, and he said, this is another reason for me to come back to Asheville. A month later, we went into production, and you have the results in your brain and in your eyes.
The rest is history.
Absolutely.
All right, what was it about David and Jethro that made you respond like that I'll be an open book for you? I mean, what gave you that confidence in them?
Well, even to just know them as the amazing personalities they are, to know the depth of their experiences in the art world, which commands so much respect over so long a time, in both of their cases. Just to even have them in my home was a real honor and and we have fun together. We really all like each other, and my life is. He sees it as an open book. It's probably less a book and more of a pamphlet, depending on the day. So, but anyway, we get along well. We just have a great time, and Jethro and I've done a lot of traveling around the country together to do shoots together, and so.
Oh, okay. So you guys already knew each other?
No.
Oh no, just kidding.
No, starting with the film though.
Oh, gotcha.
That was. And they lived with us. Janet, who's an intensely private person that I've lived with for quite a while and been with for quite a while, she agreed to welcome them into an 18,000 square foot studio, which has only one shower, which we all shared.
Not at the same time.
Not at the same time. Although sometimes Janet and I cheat on that idea with a little luck, but never mind. So
hey, this is a safe space.
So anyway, here we all are, and we got together and we did our thing. We traveled together. Jethro and I did, and David sort of wrung his hands from time to time, wondering if we were ever going to get finished. But they would come down for a week or two at a time, and we did stuff.
Okay, so there's some funny parts of you guys all being in the same space, but I imagine this must have presented some technical challenges as well. I mean, like, especially when you're observing Burk in the middle of a photo shoot, in the middle of his craft, where lighting is so important. At the same time, you're needing your own setup, your own lighting and camera setup. So how did you manage being there together in that same space without?
Well, it was actually really easy. It seems like it would be really difficult, but the thing was that we showed up to start filming, and I walked into Burk's studio, which he has redone himself with a couple of people that he's hired, 18,000 square feet. He's got muslin on all the windows. He's already has, Mole Richardson lights up here and there, spotlighting his subjects. And he's a fantastic man to look at anyways, he's so striking, and he's behind this incredibly beautiful camera, and he's always got wonderful things to say. So I walked into a treasure box, more or less, or we walked into a treasure box. It was just, when I showed up, I thought to myself, I'm never going to get an opportunity like this again, to walk in with soft, diffuse light coming in a giant warehouse, a legendary man doing his work, and I just had to make sure that I was really careful to stay out of his shot, Sure. And other than that, it was just dancing. I think Burk and I learned to dance together on set like that really easily, really well together. I was at his shoulder at all times, and it was also a wonderful collaboration on the whole film, and everything in it was very much a collaboration. It was, we were always talking about everything, and Burk knows what he wants and what he's going to get. I'm not telling him what he should do for his photographs, but as far as, this would be a really interesting thing to investigate, or maybe we should go here, maybe we should go there. It was very open in that way, to where we were always discussing shots, we were always discussing, how this film needs to be more of a work of art rather than an A to B documentary, sure. In order to represent Burk correctly. So it's a long-winded way of saying that it was not difficult to show up and be like, wow, this is going to be beautiful, and it's not going to be nearly as hard as me having to put up lights everywhere and really worrying about time of day and those kinds of things.
Well, you mentioned this was not going to be an A to B doc. I mean, that was the original goal of it?
Right.
That this was not going to be a super linear story. Okay. So that's fun.
Yeah, no, that was never the intention. I love informational documentaries, but I'm not interested in making them. I love to watch them. I've watched so many of them, but it's just something talking heads do not interest me that much. And nobody needs to validate Burk. Burk's work will validate itself when you see it come up on screen. There's nobody needs to tell you how great his work is. What you need to see is the process of a photographer working, and that's what we really thought was really important to showcase.
Well, that reminds me of a comment that you make in the documentary. It's so funny because it reminded me exactly of what my history of film professor told me in my first film school class. She was talking about the subjectivity of film, And I remember she's like, I'm going to get a show of hands, who says narrative film is subjective? Every kid in the room. Who says documentary film is subjective? And one or two, and she's like, you're all wrong. Because, and she was talking about, the documentarian who, by the very nature of it, deciding that a particular subject is important and needs to be recorded and needs to be explored is extremely subjective. And you say something really similar, and there's nothing more subjective than documentary photography. So I just find it interesting that was kind of your philosophy going into it. It's cool how you guys line up about that.
Objectivity is non-existent, I think, for any artist. There is only your own set of eyes that you can look through, and it's formulated by your heart and mind. So that you come into any composition, any attitude that you may develop about a person is all purely out of your own being, and then that forms how you relate to that person, and it's a back and forth between subject and artist, no matter what the nature of the art is. So, and I wouldn't think any of us would really want to have it any other way. That's how our hearts beat.
Yeah.
And so you get all that stuff in a row and turn it into a form, be it sculpture, painting, or photography, or whatever. And nowadays they all are one anyway. So it's all, there's not even any objectivity, honestly, I think, anymore about what photography is. It's all totally, all the rules are dead and gone. So it's all about what we can make of what we see and formulate through our hearts and minds. And our eyes are subjected to that great inner truth, out of which comes hopefully useful and helpful art to the world. Otherwise, why do we bother? I mean, a picture is not a picture, or a painting is not a painting until somebody looks at it.
Right.
It just sits there and breathes dead air until it's seen. And of course, that's the next big step. How in the world do you get it seen? So here we are, hoping that it can be seen.
Yeah.
So,
what you just said reminded me of, these are all distinct art forms, film and photography, and then journalistic photography. And people can argue about whether journalism is an art form or not, but just what you said reminded me we're in this flashpoint as a country where journalists specifically are really under fire and under a lot of scrutiny about, and people are saying, well, this is totally subjective and you're nonsense and all of that. Being in the journalistic world so long, in the photography world so long, like, how is this affecting you? Like, how do you feel about this national conversation that we're having that is spurred by something in particular, someone in particular? Let's be real.
Journalism has been extremely useful to our society over the years. It has given us a road into places we could not have been, or subjects that we could not possibly have understood all by ourselves. Mm-hmm. To that end, it is not only useful but fundamental to how we grow and survive as individuals and as a culture. And our society is now under terrible stress with the political climate that we are subjected to. And here we are. And we have to find a way to dog paddle through all this junk. So, and that's what we do with our subjective minds. So, journalism is not what it used to be. When I worked for Life magazine, they would give me 3-6 months to do a story. Mm-hmm. Whereas now things are done, if there's any assignment given by a magazine, which is pretty rare, really. If it's, then it's a very short, quick thing. You go in and slam something on the plate and grill it quickly and serve it with French fries, and all that happens in no time at all. Mm-hmm. So I think the really useful work these days is done post-journalism and probably created more often within an art context. And when it works well, then that serves as kind of the new journalism. So,
I heard someone comment recently, looking at my generation, all of you guys are whining about how tumultuous things are right now and how divided we are right now, and this is nothing compared to what it was like in the 1960s. I mean, do you find that to be true? The film takes a really hard, very nice, thorough, long look at your work from the 60s.
I was born as a New World journalist / artist at the beginning of the 60s. And that was a transitional time for my medium, for methods of communication, and for methods of surviving within the context of subject matter. I can remember walking down in a peace march on the streets of Cicero with some black folks doing a protest march, and people were hurling bricks off the ceiling of the buildings above us, trying to kill us. And none of us got killed, but people routinely got hurt. And I routinely got roughed up all through the 60s in a variety of different ways, a variety of different places. But I was never hung, and that's partly because I'm not black. And if I were black, I probably would have had a cross burned in my yard for some of the work I was doing. So I managed to escape that by virtue of parents. But it was a tough time. It's a heartbreak to think back on it. It was a heartbreak to live through it. I saw good people hurt bad. I had life photographers I knew who were my mentors. I would meet them and they would tell me how to get along as a photographer, a new photographer working on Life magazine. And we would have drinks in Paris. My first Life assignment was to Paris. How's that? Well, it was fine until the photographer that was showing me around 2 weeks later was covering the 6 days war in Israel, and he stuck his head up out of a tank and got a bullet through his head for his trouble. So he was dead already. I knew him for 24 hours before he died. And that happened to a lot of people that I knew. It was a hard time.
There is a scene in the documentary where you describe a scary experience that you had. One of, a very notable assignment of yours was being sent to the Deep South, where you're from originally, to cover a Klan rally and a cross burning. And that was just kind of a really fascinating look for me, especially now that I am observing people of our generation in Klan uniforms. We still see it. And one of the really crazy things for me, I don't know why this stuck out so much to me, was you consciously put some light on the truth behind. There's kind of this sense that the Klan is a man's thing. That's a white dude thing in the Klan, but you consciously highlight the women that you saw in the Klan, and the narrative feature Black Klansman was just in theaters, and they really put some light on that as well, that women were intricately involved in the workings of the Klan. I thought that was really amazing that you highlighted that, and the fact that you highlighted it then, but that myth kind of is still entrenched that white women don't have a lot of responsibility here.
The Klan rally represents, as I look at that film, it represents a lot of things. It represents not only an assignment that I had from Life magazine to go do it, specifically because I'm a skinny little white guy who could still speak the language, But what else and how I got through it, and you're right, women don't have a lot of power in these things. However, women are very much involved with the Klan. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of women at that Klan rally, and don't ever think that any given time in the history of the world, under any circumstances, women aren't. They're often paddling the boat. For the men and the family as well. In so many ways. I mean, women have so much more power than we all assumed, just at face value. And they are amazingly important for a whole variety of reasons, aside from the fact they were in love with each other. But here's an interesting thing about that Klan rally, as per the film. Now, when I told that story to Jethro and David about the Klan rally, and Jethro sets about making a film, he chose to not do it in a strictly journalistic fashion. He did it as as a very subjective and quite profound artist. He decided to tell the story with animation. And that film, that's one of the real high points of that film, is how Jethro took it upon himself not only to put the right music with it all through the film, by the way, but with that Klan rally, he did it with animation, and that was so much more effective than me just kind of rattling on and telling the story as I'm doing now. So that film becomes truly a very beautiful work of art in its own right, and for that my hat is tipped to Jethro all through the film. I mean, the man is incredible, in directing and putting together what needs to be said in the most articulate and eloquent manner at his disposal, which is vast. So, thanks to Jethro.
Thank you for allowing me to.
What did inspire the decision to use animation?
I think just looking at how vast Burke's life and archive and his ethos, and how he approaches art, and approaches the world, it seemed to me that we have so many different beautiful elements of cinematic storytelling to go by, and if we're really trying to push these to emotionally affect people beyond allowing them to sit back for a moment and just kind of listen to a story being told, we need to. Animation is like reenactment, right? If you look at an Errol Morris film, you can just as easily take those reenactments that he so brilliantly did and turn them into animations, and they're just as effective, or in my mind, they would be just as effective. So in order to do reenactments, we don't really want to go hire a bunch of people and put them in, and reenact that. Nobody really wants to see that or be a part of that. I mean, nobody that I know. So in order to emotionally take people through that emotional journey and really look at the depth of what Burke went through and what he's saying, it seemed like we needed to do a reenactment. But I'm always been a huge fan of animation, and I just happen to have a brother-in-law who's a phenomenal animator who has been my only film school. He was the guy I always looked to give me feedback on everything I've ever done. And so I approached him about this. I said, how do we do this where it's not a cartoon, it's not making light of anything, we're not poking fun, we're looking at the gravity of what actually happened. And so we started riffing on the themes and the colors and how it might work, and I think he did an absolutely extraordinary job, putting that. But it was just a way to do the reenactment to where Burke is the narrator of his life and of that moment, but we get to live through it in a way and see it actually come to life.
Yeah. Another thing that you mentioned briefly was the music, which is almost constant throughout the film. Though the point where it really, I guess, caught my attention the most is when you're relating your experiences in Cambodia, and there's this
breath beat.
Yes, this kind of, it's a cross between a gasp and a heartbeat, and putting that together with images of people in refugee camps and genocide victims and everything, that was very striking. So talk to me about your soundtrack and your score.
So Natalie Prass and Eric Slick are the two people who did the score. They've been my good friends for a while. And I just kind of started thinking about, when we were spending a lot of time with Burke, what would really be the the beats per minute of Burke's life as we were telling it through the story, and how we would translate that into music. So I started talking to them early on about just using percussion and a female vocalist, and no lyrics, no nothing, just emotion. And so they kind of had that floating in their head, and so we went and jumping to the breath beat part that you were referencing, that came about because we were trying to look at a way to engage an audience to make them feel something very specific about how heavy those subjects are without just putting moody minor music to it.
Sure.
So we started talking about what would be a good thing, and then Natalie started doing breaths, and then we cut it up into beats, and then we panned it, which was really fun last night to watch people start looking around. If they thought someone was crying over here, they thought someone was crying over there.
You all right, bro?
Yeah, it was a really fun way. So it keeps the rhythm, and it's also kind of this subtle emotional exhale or gasp or whatever it is. But yeah, that's where that came from, is really wanting to try to bring people into a new world of a sound experience, sound design in that emotion and all the heaviness that Burke is saying, rather than just having some kind of ambient sad music playing. But those musicians I can't give enough credit to, because they saw the film for the first time the night before we started scoring. They had the ideas. I told them, and I had some reference music. These are the tempos that I want. This is kind of what it should look like and sound like, but I want it to be your music. And so we went in, and over the course of 4 days, live scored just over and over again. Just went through, watched the film, and through a 20-minute section of the film, he would just play live percussion, and we would direct through it. And Natalie would play key or key bass or sing melodies until she nailed one that she liked, and then we would go and record it, and then we'd move on to the next section. And we went back and live scored several times through the course of 4 days, and that was it.
That's a cool process.
It was
like the pre-sound days, with the orchestra and the theater.
Yeah, it was. It was a very, this word is so overused, but it was a very organic thing, because they had just really understood the visuals. They knew Burke's story, through and through, but we just barely showed them the film. And then we went in, and it was all the first thought, best thought type of scenario, right? Like, that fits that mood perfectly. Let's move on. Let's not overthink it.
Yeah.
I just want to interrupt and just add one parenthetical comment. A huge big reason the music is so important in that film is not only did he know the right people to do it, Jethro is himself an incredible musician. Jethro has actually lived a life on the road as a very successful rock musician. He plays a beautiful classical piano, a beautiful classical guitar, and apparently a hell of an electric guitar. So this man has depth as a human being, and that's how you become a great artist. You have depth as a human being, and that's what he did all through that film. So once again, my hat and appreciation is off to Jethro for being the person he is, because without that, you're calling good people, but to truly, deeply understand the nature of the medium that they work with and to appreciate them means that you can add a dimension, both in the editing and just working with them to let them know how much their talent is loved and appreciated, which only another musician can do, within the realm that I'm sure they operated. Thank you.
Something too with regards to that. The nickname for Jethro became Swiss Army Knife. He was capable of just doing anything. Oh, I've got that tool. I've got that tool. I've got that tool. And it wasn't just the ability to make it happen. Everything he did was and is transcendent. I had an image in my mind of what this film could be. He took it to a whole other level and a whole other place. And it was just the gates were opened. The space was made for magic to happen, and Jethro beyond stepped up. And it's just, I'm so proud of how this all manifested. And when we began, we jumped into it. We had an idea of what we wanted to do, but we weren't quite clear as to what that line would be. Mm-hmm. And it started to manifest after the election. And then the relevance of how history repeats itself. And then at that point, everything started to fall into place. And he was right there to make sure that we stayed on point. And we did. We absolutely did.
you know who opened the doors for that to happen was this guy. How many producers do you know that are reasonably and righteously and responsibly worried about the bottom line and how is this all going to work, and who are willing to just open the door and say, just let it roll, just let it all happen in of its own self. And to that degree, if you think being a producer is not an art form, you take a look at what this man made happen.
Thank you.
Well, it's the truth. We wouldn't be sitting here if it weren't for you.
Thank you.
So.
Well, let's talk a little bit about editing and how you guys started to, had such an incredible range of materials, how you started putting that together, because you do construct something of a story, but you also manage to catch these little moments, like we talked about, the images of Cambodian refugees that are put in there back to back with these images from Woodstock, where, there's so much carefreeness and youth and vitality, and then immediately jump to what's happening at the same time, just in a different location.
Sure. So, at first, a lot of those storyboarding for documentaries is done in post after it's all done, right? It's
Sure.
built in the editing room, and that's partly what happened. But at the same time, I was looking at a narrative arc the whole time, right? But I wouldn't say this film has a narrative arc. If anything, I would say that this film has narrative circles, consecutive narrative circles, because there's always cycling back to something, right? And that's what I wanted to show, is Burk is hilarious and wonderful just to be around and hear speak his philosophy of art and all of those things, but he's also deadly serious about what he does, which is not a dynamic you often find. Someone who can speak to what they do, but can also show you. So a lot of times it's one or the other. And so, if anything, I didn't want to start with who is Burk, where did he come from? Let's find some found footage of him on Super 8 running around as a kid in the yard, and go and here's his parents, here's where he grew up, here's his high school. If anything, what Burk is doing right now is just as important as anything that he's ever done, right? And so that's where I really wanted to start, was his contemporary work and showing that first and foremost, because all of his history and his legacy and his archive are going to show up, and people are all going to recognize it. So that's just going to happen. So really, as far as storyboarding and editing, the edit of it, really, I just looked at where are the connecting moments and where can we go from the lighthearted moments to the deepest, darkest moments, and not have it feel like this giant, abrupt, anything that would take you out of
Stuck
the film.
together.
Right. It really needs to show both sides and find good transitions. But to shorten all that, editing is still all music. Editing is complete rhythm, and to find that you can go from something terrible and tragic to something lighthearted, as long as you can find the right rhythm to transition between those two ideas.
When you said, this is kind of doubling back, when you said you were directing your musicians through the film, like, were you literally
I wasn't
directing?
conducting with a wand, no, but I was conducting without a wand. So I was just saying, this is the tempo, and as we were going through, for tempo, I would go up and then thumbs up and stop, and can we take the attack off of this keyboard and blah 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 blah. It's they know far more what they're doing than I do, but as far as knowing what needed to happen for the music for the film, it was really fun to just kind of guide them along. So yeah.
I like what you said about your narrative circles. It kind of gives me this image in my mind, like we've got two things, because we talked about the Klan rally and the tumultuousness of the 60s, and people are comparing it to our day and age now. So you had this massive project in the 60s near Greenville with the Klan rally, and then following this massive project in this decade in the same area, where you're not looking at the Klan, you're looking. The title of your exhibition is just African Americans of Greenville, right? Or the exhibition that we see in the film.
Oh yeah, Perceptions and Recognitions, which was the name of the show at the Greenville Museum of Art in North Carolina, which happened a couple of years ago. So then we're certainly riding the moment of the contemporary moment of what their lives are about, all across their society. So it was an amazing gift to be able to work with these people, as well as a challenge to try and do these wonderful people justice, because a lot of them are street people. They've been in jail, they've lived homeless, they've been in jail for drugs. They've all turned their lives around and are mentoring people now in really interesting ways. So
now, did the museum give you this assignment specifically, or did they give you a theme and you chose your subject? How did that work?
It was an incredibly fortunate commission that this museum gave me, and it was based on the fact that they had been to my studio and seen the work that I had on my walls, where I had been photographing for several years while living in that town of Wilson, North Carolina, the black folks. And that's always been a favorite subject of mine ever since I was a kid. And so it's always been something I've gravitated to for all kinds of reasons. The music in the black churches is a huge, big factor. So they saw these pictures and they said, it's amazing what you're doing on your own, but what if we did an exhibition where we feature in one gallery the work you did on Martin Luther King's death and funeral, and in another gallery we just show only new work of contemporary black Americans to contrast with that time and place, and that'll be the other gallery. So it was a commission, and my better half, Janet Kagan, worked with me a lot on the research and the text, and she wrote the piece for the book, and really did a lot of work on that exhibition, and in fact came up with a name for the book, which is not unlike Janet on many occasions. So that's what we did.
That's kind of where I see our circles coming around again, because the whole process of your film is artist observing an artist, and in your exhibition you observe so many artists. The first person we meet, I think, is a local radio personality, and then several different dance troupes, and then a gospel trio, and then a soloist, and then just like beautiful aspects of artistic aspects of life. Like there's a really striking photo of a man's hairstyle, and then the tattoo art and everything. I thought it was so cool that it's an art piece about art pieces about art and life.
The reason that happens is because Jethro and I share, I think I can honestly say, a sincere, honest appreciation for all kinds of people and all kinds of ages, makeup, tattoos, no tattoos. We both and David for sure has encouraged us to act on this, to just appreciate people, just to take our humanity through that trip with our eyes and our hearts. And another example of that, which I think both David and Jethro share a lot of credit for, is that speaking of the circle being complete, both of these guys have a profound appreciation for the legacy and the history of many art forms. David is a very important art collector in his own right, quite aside from this monkey business that we're now talking about. He's a very well-known collector of surrealism and Dada, and is important to museum collections and books that have happened all because of his very important life in that world. That makes him a man that can understand the history and appreciate the history of many art forms. Now then, enter Jethro and myself, who have a history in photography, Jethro and David totally get the importance of a lot of different artists that have formed the history of photography. So that when I start talking about Quattrocentro painters, they both, it's just like, it's like going to a candy store and ordering a box of M&Ms or Little Debbie's. I mean, it's all part of their sensibility. So that when I start talking about Cartier-Bresson, they know his work as well as I know his work. So that then we can start talking about the nature of the paintings of the Middle Ages. And I can get off on this kind of silly rant about nipples galore and all these paintings. And
Rubens fan, are you?
Yeah. and Jethro can just ride with it. He can decide how to present that, because he knows all about decisive moments in Cartier-Bresson. And he can just do all of that. It just is automatic to these men that they get everything. And that I can rattle on in my little North Carolina way about all of this stuff. And they're so far ahead of me and knowing how to put that into a form. And thank goodness they had the rudder on the boat of that film, and they made it all happen with the brilliance of really very innovative ways to convey ideas in a film. So thanks, guys.
Oh man, you too. I want to add to that. Immediately there was a complicit connection, understanding, and intimacy that was created. And I think a lot of documentaries try to bring an audience in, but they can't because they don't create an intimacy with the subject. And I remember calling Burk when we were about to get started and said, look, I have a favor to ask of you. Is it possible that we can come and live with you while we're doing this? And he said, I totally understand your question. This is exactly what I did when I was with Life. I would embed myself with my subjects. He said, but we need to talk to Janet. And as you heard, Janet was totally okay with it. That, I think, is the secret to creating that kind of spark and magic. And we did it. Yeah. And there was an understanding there between us and a respect. Burk, here we're working with this great master who has changed our visual culture and enriched us visually. And here we are coming to make a film about him. That's a high bar. And people have said that to us. That was pretty gutsy of you. And Jethro took that on with absolute gusto and absolutely matched that bar. And did justice to the visual images that Burk created with moving images. So, wow, magic. Yeah. As a word you use in the documentary.
Yeah, no, you just referenced the title, the Be There. Yeah, and you talk about that in there, and about how you've got to be on your feet, and you've got to be rolling with the action if you're going to live this artist lifestyle. So talk a little bit more about that. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think you and I can share this conversation together, because it's not so much that you and Jethro and I match the bar. We pass the bar back and forth.
True.
And that's really what happened when Jethro and I would travel across the country, and we would consult with David about what we were doing. He was always in the loop, but I would see something that looked like an interesting picture, and Jethro would see something that he would see what I saw, and then he would add his own component to it. So there are any number of instances where pictures that I took are absolutely well beyond what I would have done if Jethro hadn't been there, and we were passing the bar back and forth. And and like I say, David was always a part of that too, because we were checking in with him pretty constantly about what we had been seeing. So to that degree, the film and my work was as much a collaboration with the nature of their sensibilities and their depths as artists. So I grew as an artist by being with them.
I want to say that I'm really glad that I wasn't there on the road trip, because I found out that Jethro had been strapped to the roof at one point, willingly, to get some shots. So no, I don't think I could have done that, nor would I wanted to have witnessed that.
Well, not in the current coat you're wearing. You wouldn't.
Probably true.
But we would have found a way. We would have found a way to keep you protected from the bitter cold that he was confronting. I mean, there was snow on the ground. So,
Yeah, no, okay. So you just got labeled Brilliant Artist. Congratulations.
Thank you. I only need his quotes on my website, and
Yeah,
I'm done for life.
Absolutely
Yeah.
true. Okay, but I did want to ask you, I meant to ask you earlier, was that an intimidating assignment? Like, hey, we're gonna go photograph Burk Uzzle.
Well, let me put it into perspective this way. The next project we're doing is dealing with some world-famous architects. There's a project coming up that David and I are working on, and I am not intimidated in the slightest by them because of having made this film with Burke. It doesn't faze me one bit. When I think about it, I'm like, oh, that's going to be a cinch. And it was because I was so fantastically terrified about the idea of dropping the ball in this film. I never would have let myself live that down if I had disappointed Burke in representing him, for sure. But I grew to mirror what Burke said. I grew immensely as a cinematographer and as a filmmaker just by being able to watch him work and by implementing F11 and be there for myself, which was the core idea for the film and the core idea of the ethos that I had to follow in order to keep up with him, for sure.
All right, well, one more before we go, Mr. Producer Guy. You're like, yeah, okay. What is the next step for F11 and Be There?
We are planning to have this film screen at other festivals, and we've submitted to a bunch, and we're going to submit to a bunch more. We're hoping to get the film on television. We think it's appropriate, and we're hoping to get some limited theatrical, and most importantly, we really want it to get into universities and schools that specialize in photography and in social rights and activism.
Yeah, social justice, for sure.
So we have a broad plan. Jethro and I are planning to sit down and narrow it down a bit, but those are the next steps. And any way you can assist us in that process, we obviously would appreciate it.
Well, I was just going to say I love that goal because the role of the artist in social justice issues is really becoming more and more key. And I mean, we've seen that throughout from photographers and filmmakers, for the past 100 years. Not to get dramatic, but I always think back to the example of the first people kicked out of the Third Reich regime was the filmmakers. That's how we got all of our American horror directors. We just took all the Germans.
And that's it. Oppressive regimes first target the artists because they are the mirror of society, and they are the wake-up call. And we all need to be conscious and aware and support each other and also pay attention. You don't want to put yourself in harm's way, but you don't want to be a shrinking violet.
Sure.
It's a balance.
All right, guys, thank you so much for taking some time with us. Really appreciate it. And it's a beautiful film. I'm so glad you brought it to Austin.
Thanks for paying such close attention.
Thank you.
Amazing. You obviously
Thank you.